Thank you, Vic. I sure appreciate it.
Thanks so much for being here. Allie, please give us a brief bio on yourself.
Okay, well, my name is Allie, and I call it domestic engineer, which is actually a housewife. And I'm a real avid camper. I've hunted, and I love to fish and swim. Later on, you will find out why camping is no longer on my agenda. All of the others I still do. I am 46 years old, and I really was skeptic until I found out that Bigfoot and dogmen are actually real. Now, anyone that talks about them, I believe them.
Yeah, after your experiences, I can understand why you'd be a card-carrying believer now. What kind of interests did you have in cryptids like Bigfoot when you were growing up?
Oh, every book that I could find on Bigfoot I had. I remember whenever The Legend of Boggy Creek came out in the movie for here in Texarkana and part of Oklahoma, I would watch that all the time and see if I could pick up something, that I had not seen on the film or something like that. And as far as dogmen, to me they were werewolves. And this is crazy, but I always wished that I could be a werewolf. I guess it's just childhood fantasies. And whenever I found out that werewolves were real, I'm like, no, I don't want to be one.
Yeah, I figured that would change your tune on that after that experience you had. Have you heard of anyone else having any encounters in the area where you had that first encounter?
There is one that I had. I didn't have the real experience at this time. We were living in a little community that is on an Indian reservation. The neighbor that I had, her sister, we would all go down to the creek every day in the summertime and swim, and go pick berries or whatever. And she went and she came and told my neighbor about what had happened, and I just so happened to be there. And she was talking about she had seen this little place called Flat Rock. Had pretty deep creek running through it, and then it went shallow, and we'd let the babies and stuff play in it. Well, in the one where you could dive in, she said that she saw this gray, smaller animal, she called it, and said that it was crouched down and was washing its face in that water. And she said when it stood up, she said it looked like it was about as tall as her. And she's like almost 5 foot. And said that it started running off to the north. I guess it had seen her and it had scared her. And that's the only one that I've really heard about. And I believe that might have been a Bigfoot.
She never gave you any description of what its face looked like to help you decide whether it was a Bigfoot or maybe a dogman?
No, all she said was she seen it from the back, and when it stood up, it looked like her, the height. And she said that whenever it took off to the north, because she was coming in from the south, that its back was towards her.
Oh, okay, I see.
I asked her myself if she could tell me what it looked like. And that's what she told me. She only saw it from the back and squatting down, and she knew it was washing its face.
Oh, I see. Speaking of what happened to you when you were younger, when you were 13, one night a neighbor knocked on your door with some disturbing news. What did she have to say?
Oh my gosh. She came running over to our house, and she was banging on the door and knocking. This was about 11 o'clock at night. And me and my mother have not went to bed yet. We were night owls. There was a movie that we were getting ready to watch. Anyway, my mom opened the door, asked what was going on, and at that time we were having a feud between us. And she said, "There's a big monster on top of your house." My mom said, "You're just drunk. You don't know what you're talking about." And she goes, "No, look, look." And my mom went outside. Well, I wasn't going outside. And she kind of dragged me outside with her. We looked up there, and we didn't see anything. Mom said, "Well, what did it look like then?" And the neighbor said that it was big and tall and hairy, and it had red eyes. Mom said, "Well, what was it doing?" And she goes, Well, when I saw it, whatever it was doing, she said, I don't know, that it stopped and just stood there and looked at me. I know something had been going on because there's no trees around our house, and my mom and dad had to replace their shingles twice in 20 years on their roof. Anyway, back to the movie. It was going to have Dracula and a werewolf in it. Needless to say, we did not watch that movie.
I can't say I blame you. Was this a 2-story house or a single-story house?
A single. And it was a brick house and had the regular shingles on the top. No chimney. Thank goodness, because it probably crawled down that chimney. But no, all the houses were built the same. There's different floor plans, but it was all built the same. They were built by the Bureau of Indian Affairs. So that's about all I can say about that.
How close were the houses together?
They were probably about 40 feet apart.
Not exactly right on top of each other, but not all that far apart at the same time.
Right.
When she's telling you about all of this, did she seem preoccupied, wanting to keep an eye out for something up there on the roof that might be reaching down to grab her? Or when she was talking to you about this, did she make it seem like it was currently on the roof?
She made it seem like it was currently on the roof, and whenever we opened the door, of course the screen opened outwards. She was standing as close as she could get to that door. And my mom had to push, and she seemed a little preoccupied about something. She stepped back against the house because we had a front porch on there, and she was talking from the side of the house. She wasn't talking from in front of the door like most people would. So I guess she thought that it was still there and it was going to grab her and take her off or whatever.
Ew. From where she was standing talking to you at that moment, was she far enough away from the roof line where something big up there wouldn't have been able to reach down and grab her?
Yes. She was far enough away from the edge that nothing would grab her.
Yeah, I was thinking it just wouldn't make sense if she was worried about some monstrous thing on the roof to be standing in front of the front door where it could easily come over and reach down and grab her. That just wouldn't make sense at all. But back to the whole camping thing, Allie. Did you take your kids camping often before that first encounter?
We went camping almost every weekend. When summer was out, we would go maybe a week, and we went up to 2 weeks at a time camping. So yeah, we were pretty avid campers.
It sure sounds like it. All right, Allie, let's talk about this first encounter you had. Please give us every last detail that comes to mind.
Okay. This happened about 2, maybe 3 years ago. We had went camping, and I had a boyfriend at the time, and his name was Ben. We had went to this little place up here on Keystone Lake, because I live in Tulsa, Oklahoma. We had went out, and we were going to, enjoy ourselves, and we were going to camp out there for a week. Well, we went and found a camping spot, and because it's usually the one that we always had. We always had this one certain camping spot that we went to. So we went, and we pulled up the track, unloaded everything, got the tents out, and we were running a little late, so it was probably about 9 o'clock whenever I got dinner finished and got the kids in bed. Well, we also had 2 little baby puppies. They were at the age they could eat and drink on their own, and we had brought them with us. Whenever we all went to bed, the puppies went and slept with my daughter in her tent. The big tent was mine and Ben's. The middle tent was my daughter's, and the smaller tent was my twin boys. Well, we all went to bed, and we were all pretty exhausted. My daughter, you could hear her snoring right away. I mean, she just went out when she laid down. My boys, they were talking, and probably about 20 minutes, we kept hollering at them to go to sleep, go to sleep, go to sleep. Well, about 20 minutes later, we didn't hear any noise at all from them, so we knew they were asleep. Puppies were asleep. Ben and I had stayed up, and we were talking, amongst ourselves, whisper naturally. I would say probably about 30 minutes, 45 minutes after we had got the boys asleep, we started hearing this walking, and it was on the gravel that they put on the roads that you could go here to the campsite or you can go here to the campsite. The actual road that led from the entrance of the campsite down to the lake was asphalt. So we knew they had to be on our side of the road, whatever it was. And we thought it was a deer at first, and he said, no, that's no deer. He said, it's walking too hard, and he said, it's two-legged. And so the fear started sitting in on me. I was starting to get a little hyper and tingly feeling. He just went to the other side of him, and he pulled up his gun, which was a .30-30. He thought, well, you know, if they come up here and they try to hurt us or anything, they're going to get surprised. Well, we just kept listening, and it started getting closer and closer, and then it would stop, and I don't know what it would do. But anyway, Ben, whenever it would stop, Ben would stand up on his knees, and he could see out of the tent mesh that was on top of the tent. So he would do that, and he bent back down. I said, what is it? He goes, I don't know. I said, well, let me see. He goes, no, you don't want to see. I said, yeah, I do. He says, no. He says, you stay where you're at, and you stay as still as you can be. We hear the walking start again. Well, it's getting closer and closer. About that time, he jumped back down, and he said, just be as quiet and still as you can be. I said, what is it? He said, I'm not going to tell you. I said, okay. I said, is it a man? He goes, no, it's not a man. And that's when the fear really started setting in, because I thought to myself, well, the only other thing that it could be is, because, like I said, I was real interested in these werewolves and Draculas and everything like that whenever I was a child. First thing that popped to my mind was a werewolf. I was always watching movies that had werewolves in them and different scenarios where they would come out at and everything. It popped to my mind. There's this one movie, the werewolf come out of the woods at him, and it went to the house. And I'm like, oh, if it went to a house, it has no problem going to a tent. I really started getting nervous and jittery at this time. Well, I could hear that thing walking again. And this time when it stopped right behind our tent. And I started getting very, very upset and nervous, and my kids were in the other two tents, and we kind of made it like a horseshoe type thing around their tents because of the fire, you know, and the way everything was positioned in the campsite. Well, I wanted the kids to where I could see them. After it stopped, it started again, you know, within seconds, and it went on the other side of the Suburban that we were in. And you could hear it, the springs on the Suburban, and it happened twice. You could hear him pushing that Suburban, like, you know, come out, I know where you are. The next thing we know, he's trying to open the door on the driver's side, it sounded like. Well, he quit because there was nobody in there, and he come around the front of the Suburban and stood right in front of our tent. The campfire was burning out, and we had this drop cord, which I should say drop light, but it's like a long cord with the light on the end of it, and we had that hanging up in the tree and had it on. The shadow from the light was hitting our tent, and he was standing there, and I sat there and I thought, oh my God, it is a werewolf. It's before I knew anything about being called dog men or anything like that, actually. I went and I started getting nervous as all get out, and he was just standing there looking. You see him turning his head through the shadow. And about that time, I started trying to get up. Ben pushed me back down. He goes, what the heck are you doing? I said, I've got to go get the kids. He goes, no. He said, it's too close. He says, as long as they're asleep, maybe it won't hurt them. I said, no. I said, I know these things, and I said, I have got to get my kids. And we were whispering. And this thing was probably about 15 foot away from the tent. He went and he covered my mouth and was like halfway laying on me, holding me down. And the tears just started rolling because we could see the shadow getting closer to the tent. And so I sat there and I closed my eyes I didn't want to see it, and it started looking in our tent. Well, then he had laid down on top of me. Basically, he had pulled the sleeping bag over just as much as he could, and he said, be quiet, don't move. Don't move, don't move. I said, all right. I said, but what is it? What is it really? He goes, don't worry about it. About that time, that thing looked over in the tent. We were laying real still. Well, I opened my eyes, and I could see this thing looking in the tent. I knew he was probably about 7 foot tall because our tent was 6 foot in the center, and he was looking over in it, and he had to bend down, some. And, oh my God. He stood up and started walking towards the kids' tent. Next to our tent was my daughter. And my boys took up the tail end of the little horseshoe that we had made with the tent. And so I could hear him, and with that shadow I could see him, which way he was going. And pretty much what he was doing and where he was going to stop. Well, my daughter's tent was probably about, 4 foot high. And it was so hot that summer, we had decided to take the top of our tents off. And so it was just mesh, the tent mesh that allows air to come in and out. I knew if it stopped that tent, it was going to look in. And all I could think of was, oh, God, don't let her wake up. Don't let her wake up. Don't let them puppies wake up. And I was crying and bawling. And my boyfriend at the time, he was holding me down, and I was trying to get up and tell him that I had to go get my kids. And of course, he wasn't going to let me. He said, you have got to lay here. He said, if you go out there now, there's no telling what that thing will do to you. So I listened to him, and I stayed there. And like I said, all I could think of was, oh, God, please don't let him wake up. Please don't let him wake up. And Ben had set up again, and he was watching where it was going. I knew it's my daughter's tent. He said that it's just looking in. And I thought, oh my God. Well, I don't know how she was positioned or anything in the tent, or the little puppies. It just looked in for maybe 5 seconds, I would say. And it stood upright and started going to the next one. And that's where my twin boys were at. I thought, oh my God, please let them be asleep. Please don't wake up. Please don't wake up. Because they had a habit of staying up till 2, 3 o'clock in the morning in the summertime. And it was probably maybe 11:30, 11:45 when this all was happening. I said, I've got to get to my kids. He said, no. He said, he's all right now. He said, I don't know what he's doing. I really don't know what it is. And he said, whatever it is, he said, you have no idea what it could do to you if you go out there. So I sat there and I kind of raced up and I looked, and it was looking in my boys' tent. Well, apparently there wasn't anything in there that it was too interested in. And the tears were still streaming. At the time, whenever the thing had walked away from our tent and went to my daughter's tent, Ben had started crying. So we're sitting there, tears are just rolling out of our eyes. Whenever I stood up and I peeked out the tent myself, it had left the boys' tent and had went over to where we had placed our food. And I thought, oh my God, thank God, he didn't do anything to them kids. Thank God there wasn't anything he was interested in. I asked then. I said, what is he doing now? He goes, I don't know, but I think he's interested in that food is what I think. Well, I kept watching, and I had really didn't have a description at the time as to how it looked or what it was. I could just barely see it. It was going through everything. It went through the bags that we had for our clothes. There was clothes strung everywhere. The food, whatever wasn't packaged, was strung everywhere. What was in the ice chest was out of the ice chest, and the ice chest were dumped upside down, ice everywhere. Our food, our drinks everywhere. I don't know exactly what it was looking for. Well, after he had dumped everything and threw everything everywhere, we started seeing it. He was walking off, and probably about 60, 70 yards from us was where another camper had parked, and they were in an RV type thing. They started walking towards their campsite. Well, I could see from the back of it what it looked like. And this thing, like I said before, it had to be 7, maybe 8 foot tall. From the back, you could see the muscles in the back, in the arms, in the legs. I could not see the actual front of him, but whenever he was walking, he turned his head to the left, like he was looking out at the lake. And I saw the side view of it. This thing had ears, like a dog's ears, but they were sticking straight up. He was hairy all over. It was a dark, either a dark gray or black, that from the light that I could see him through, he was like a medium gray, and whenever he was turned around, he had a stripe down his back. He looked like a skunk. He had this stripe down his back, a real dark, dark black. And the rest of him was a little lighter than that. And you could tell that he was pretty strong, and there wouldn't be no way that a man could stand up to this thing. And I don't even know if this 30-30 that my boyfriend had at the time would be able to take it down. I mean, to take a deer down, no problem, because that's what I used to deer hunt. This thing went walking on the road and was starting towards the other campers. At that time, I thought, oh my God, because they had just went in their house, and I don't know if they were sitting there watching TV or what, but you could still hear the noise from their RV. And I'm like, oh my God, I hope it don't do anything. Well, I guess, like I said before, it wasn't interested in that either. He walked on the road, and you could hear this growl, crunch, crunch, crunch. The boat ramp was probably a mile away from where we were camping. It took Ben and I about 20, 25 minutes to walk from the boat ramp to where we were camping. And this thing took off. And I mean, it took off. They had bit down, and I mean, just literally took off. And it wasn't 2 minutes, because I had unzipped the tent and I was going after my kids. Like I said, it was about 2 minutes, and we heard this awful, loud, howl, screaming type noise coming from down the boat ramp. And I thought, oh my God, thank God it's down there now. And I grabbed my kids out of the tent, grabbed the puppies, and at that time, Ben just grabbed his gun and his keys and said, let's go. So we took off and went home. We decided to come back the next day and get our stuff, what we could salvage and everything. And when we come back the next day, you could see there was dust in the area around our tent, around the front of our tent. At that time, you could see this thing had humongous feet. And at the end, you could see where, like, toenails, claws, or whatever, had made an imprint in the dust as well as, you know, the rest of the footprint. And I thought, oh my God. Well, I looked around to see if there was any hair or anything, you know, that I could pick off of there. And he didn't rub up against the tent. The tree where we had the drop light, I looked there, you know, to see if there was anything. And we decided to look at the Suburban because, like I said, it was on the other side, and it was trying to push it over or whatever it was trying to do, and trying to open the door. Well, you could see where it had been pushing on the Suburban. There's a small dent where one of his, I'm going to call it hands, because that's what it looked like whenever I saw it walking away. I could see it was a little hunched over, and these arms were long. His hands, his fingers, and I'm going to say nails were long and practically hung past his knees. You could see the little dent there where one of his hands had been. You could see the length of everything from his hand, because there was dust on the Suburban as well. We went and we salvaged everything. We were talking about it. And I looked at him and I said, that was a werewolf of it. He says, I believe it was. He said, I didn't want you seeing it. He said, because I know how you are. And he said, I didn't want you going to any kind of panic attack or anything when you seen this or seen it going towards the kids. I said, well, you didn't do a good enough job. I said, because I was in the panic attack whenever it was going towards the kids. He said, I had to do it. He said, if I would have let you go, he says, I know you would have run up there right in front of that thing. He said, you would have had it killed all of us. I said, yeah, I said, I know. And we continued to pick up everything. We got out of there. And that's about the last time that me and my kids ever went camping. For the past 2-3 years, we have not been out there on the lake. We have not been out camping. I would love to go again, but I'm afraid that something like that will happen again. I believe that was one of the scariest moments I have ever had in my life. I know if the kids would have seen it, woke up or anything, there was no way any of us would have made it out there. If it wouldn't have been for Ben holding me down and telling me to shut up and be quiet, I believe that, again, there was no way that we were going to get out there. He went back out there a couple of times, looking around, and he went and he asked the camp director, which lived up there by the entrance of the campsite, if he had heard anything or seen anything, the whole time that he had been there. And at that time, he said that sometimes there is this kind of a growl sound. He said sometimes there would be something that would hit his trailer on the back side of the trailer, which would be on the west side of his trailer. And he said that's all that he had experienced. He said that he never had seen anything. And he said that's the only thing that he had heard and the only thing that he could tell that physically had happened. So, Ben didn't tell him what had happened. I told my mom, because she believes in these things. She gave me a hug and she said, you did very well. She said, by not getting up and going running to the kids. I said, Mom, he could have killed my kids. My mom said, well, you stayed there and you did what you could. I said, yeah, but if he would have come out there, I said, Ben was right. He killed every one of us. I said, because if it went to either one of my kids and started tearing up the tents trying to get in or anything, I would have been out of that tent so fast. She looked at Ben and she said, I want to thank you. She said, you did a good job. Well, I could not tell my dad, could not tell my brother. And so it was just me and my mom talking about everything. And that's pretty much the story about the camping trip. Like I said, we've been wanting to go camping, but we've been holding ourselves off. And the kids keep telling me that they want to go camping and everything because they didn't see this. And I'm trying to tell them, no, you don't want to go camping. They got a little bit older, probably about a year, maybe last year. And I told them exactly what had happened at the campsite. Because now they're 16 and 19. The 16-year-old twins, they're like, oh, Mom, now you know he wasn't there. It was a bear. I said, no, it wasn't no bear. Because the campsite is located across the road from a game life refuge. And they first thought they had, bear. They argued with me, and I told them no. I said, I know what I saw. I said, so drop it. My daughter sat there, and she was always quiet when we talked to her and everything. And she sat there, and she took the Solly, and she just looked down and went to playing with her diary or whatever she had, magazine, or I forget what she had. And she didn't say a word. And I asked her if she had anything to say. She shook her head no. And I think she was in kind of a surprised state at that time. The boys were in denial. And Ben and I were still caught up not being able to go camping and stuff, and what we had saw. We had no idea what it was. We did not want to see it again. So I have done everything that I could to keep from camping and going out there again, but like I said, I don't want to see it again. That was one of my scariest moments in my whole life.
Oh, I can understand why. That would shake anyone up, right down to their soul. How much grief has it caused you not being able to tell your dad about what happened?
Oh my gosh, it was a lot of grief because, I want to tell him, me and him were closer than me and my mom. And I could tell him anything that I thought. Well, my mom had told him about, when I was younger, about little spirits that she had seen in the house that we were living in at the time. And a light that would turn off and on by itself. And he was like, oh, it's just an electrical problem, and what you saw was just a dust storm type thing, that had happened in the house. He laid it off as that type of stuff. He was not interested in any type of ghosts, goblins, hobgoblins, or anything like that we would tell him about. So I decided I would not tell him about this. But yeah, it was very hard to not be able to tell him, but I knew that he would not believe it. So that's why I told my mom, and me and my mom sat down, and the talking that she did to me finally got me settled down about that night. But, like I said, there's no way that we're going to go camping again, not out there at least.
Well, it sure is a shame you can't share that experience with your dad, but I'm so glad you at least had your mom there, and she was open and receptive to listening to you share what happened that night.
Yeah, that was a very good thing.
Yeah, I'd say so. What effect did your kids' response to being told about what happened have on you?
Well, the boys still don't believe that that's what I saw. My daughter, she had taken it in and tossed it around in her mind. She knew that I would not tell her something that wasn't true about that. So I think she believes me, but she don't want to talk about it. My boys, they still say, it was a bear, it was a bear. And I said, no, it's not. I still don't think they believe that they're just playing it off.
I realize Ben's not your boyfriend now, but is he totally out of the picture where he can't corroborate your story so that the kids know that, yes, it was a dog man?
Unfortunately, he passed away last July.
Oh.
And he had told them once, he had sat there whenever we were talking about it to the kids, and he sat there and he told the boys, he said, yes, that is exactly what we saw. Shelby was sitting in the front room, and like I said, she won't talk about it. The boys were sitting there at the kitchen table with us while we were talking to them, and they sat there and they put their heads down like, yeah, right. Well, Ben had told him, said, look at me. He said, I would not lie to you about something like this, and you know that. Well, after Ben and I had split up, we had got our own place. He would come over and visit, because, we were good friends at that time, after we had split up. The boys were there. Whenever they would come, he would come in the house, they would go out of the house, because they didn't want to hear anything about the camping trip. They just don't want to bring it up anymore.
Well, don't feel too bad about that. Sometimes denial is the way that people deal with situations like that. We both know you saw what you saw, whether they believe it or not. Those boys are here today as a direct result of the way you reacted that night, you and Ben. So whether they believe that story about what happened on that camping trip or not, it's immaterial. It just doesn't matter. You know the truth, and that's all that matters. I know you didn't get the best look at that dog, man, but did at any time you get a chance to take a look at its legs?
Its legs, it looked like a human leg. It was real buff, and like I said, it just looked like a human leg. Down towards the, I call it ankle, it had like a protrusion where the bone or gristle or something. It was kind of like a dog's foot then, the way it was hooked onto the leg. How they had that little protrusion on the back. Then it had just the foot. But that's all that I could see at that time. Because, like I said, it was walking away from us and was going out the side of the drop light.
Those protrusions you're talking about, those are called hocks. So it did have canine-style legs after all. Above the hocks, its legs looked human-like, but if it had hocks sticking out, it had canine-like legs then. Let's talk about that howl you heard, Allie. How far away was that boat ramp from you?
That boat ramp was probably about a mile from where we were camping, from the campsite that we were at. There were campsites all the way down to the boat ramp. And I remember there was some friends of Ben's that he had worked with, and they go catfishing at night so they can catch the big ones. And there were two boys of theirs that go what they call noodling, and that's where you stick your hand in the hole and you grab a catfish that's in there and pull it out. And you don't have a hook, you don't have fishing line, you just have your hand in there. Right before this thing howled, you could hear them down there, let's go, let's go, let's go. I have no idea what they saw, what happened or anything, but right after this thing howled, they went and you could see them just charging out there in their car. I mean, they were going. That was the last time we saw them. Ben said that he talked to them and asked him what happened. They said the only thing that they knew was there was something big that was walking on the grass around their tent, and they could hear sticks breaking because there was a tree right there where their tent was. He said, we wasn't taking no chances on a bear being there. He said, if it was a bear, he said, we were gone. And so, like I say, he believes it was a bear, and we think that it was this thing that was at our campsite. But right before we saw them coming up the road, this thing howled. And the howl was so loud, it sounded like it was right there at our tent again. But it wasn't. And it was a longer howl than what a coyote or regular wolf would do. When it began, it was like a guttural growl, home type thing. Then it just led off into the actual howl that you would hear. At the time, Ben and I would walk up and down that road going from the campsite because we had camped there before. Like I said, we picked our same campsite every time that we went there. And we had always walked up and down that road from where our campsite was to the end of that road where the boat ramp started for exercise. And it was a mile. He pitched it with his truck at the time that he had and measured it, and it was a mile from boat ramp to where our campsite. And it took us probably 25 minutes to walk from the boat ramp to our campsite, the speed that we were walking. But like I said, whenever I saw it take off, he had bent down, and I cannot actually tell you if the front of him was on the ground. When this thing took off, I mean, it took off on that road. And I know it was going past the dust that it had kicked up off the gravel. I mean, I saw him bend down, I saw him take off, and I saw the gravel. Well, when I looked back, there was no seeing him. He had got down to that boat ramp and was doing his howl.
Being there in the moment, at any time, did you think it might have been another dog man that you were listening to?
It could have been. It could have been calling this one down there, or down there letting it know where it was at, or whatever. But I really believe because of the guttural sound that it started with down there at the howl, because he was like doing his little guttural sound around the tents. And I don't want to say moaning or groaning, but it was, oh, I don't know how to explain it. It was like he was like a person would be groaning, trying to figure out something. And this thing, when it came up there was this strange sound. I cannot tell you what it was or anything, but it was going and it kept doing that until this thing went past our tent and went to the kids' tent. Like I said, I have no idea what it was, but anyway, the only thing that I saw at the campsite was this thing taking off, going through our food, going through our clothes, and taking off. Didn't see it at the kids' tent because, like I said, Ben had been holding me down. But yeah, he could possibly have been another one down there calling this one. I believe that it was the same one that was at our campsite.
I sure hope that wasn't the case. Do you think that strange chuffing sound you just mentioned might have been the dogman's feet on the gravel by your tent?
It possibly could have been. It possibly could have been because our tent was on the grassy area, and we always had these foam things, like the egg crate mattress type things. We would have them under our sleeping bags, just in case there was a rock or something under there, we wouldn't feel it. So, yeah, it possibly could have been, but we were right at the edge of where the grass ended and the gravel started because of the way that I had the tent positioned at that time.
Oh, okay, I see. Did you get the impression the dogman approached your tent because it heard you and Ben whispering?
I believe it did. I believe it was going to the tents to try to find out where that whispering and moving around was coming from, what it was coming from. Because, like I said, it would bend over and look into the tents, and then all of a sudden it just stood up and walked away and went over to the picnic table. And I mean, it wreaked havoc on that picnic table.
It sure sounds like it. When it looked down into your tent through that vent, how much of its face were you able to see?
I opened my eyes and I was able to see its whole face.
What kind of details can you give us about what you saw when you looked up and saw that face?
Oh my God. Well, like I said before, it had the pointy ears and it had little strings of hair on the very point of the ears sticking up. They had a long nose. It did not look like it was extremely long. It looked like it was about a medium-sized nose, is what it looked like. The mouth, I can't tell you, he did not open his mouth at that time. It was closed. The eyes were amber. The hair around his neck and head was kind of puffed out. It actually looked like a German Shepherd type head. You know how they can puff out around the ears and the neck and the head. His hair was not very long around the facial area. That's about all I can remember. As soon as I saw it, I closed my eyes again.
Oh, I don't blame you there. I'm glad you did shut your eyes. Every once in a while, I'll have someone from Oklahoma ask me if I've heard of any encounters happening in that state. And all I can do is shake my head and tell them there are plenty of dogman encounters being reported from Oklahoma.
Great.
All right, Allie, let's talk about this second encounter you had. Please tell us what happened that night.
This campsite that we were at is only 9 miles from where we lived. We moved because of this encounter that happened the second time. It was a school night, and it was like in, I want to say October, November. That's the time this happened, so it was cool. Well, I'm not going to say cool, it was cold. So I had sent the kids to bed early, at their bedtime at, 10 o'clock. They all went to sleep, and the way my house was set up, you walk in the door, you walk right into the living room, off to your right is my room, go straight through to the dining room, off to the right is the pantry and my daughter's room, and the back door. I was on the left side of the house, and I had this little dog, and he was always jumping and trying to get on me, and everything. He was my little lap dog. He's my baby. And he would watch movies with me. He would literally watch movies with us. So we were going to watch this movie together. And I tell you what it was. It was American Werewolf in London. It had not started, it was just rolling previews of other movies. That's what it was showing. It had not shown any werewolf or anything like that. And I heard this noise outside. And the neighbor has this street light right in their backyard, and it lights up their whole backyard. Well, I went and I looked out of the window, and I see this thing standing in their backyard, and it was practically right underneath the light. And it was staring at their house. I can't really tell you exactly how tall it was, but I want to say 7 foot. And it was big. And it was hairy. And the fur or hair on it, whatever you want to call it, was gray. And this thing was kind of hunched over, and so I said the arms was extremely long, just like that one that was at the campsite. As soon as I saw it, my love seat was on that side, and that's what I was sitting on. As soon as I saw it, I shrunk down in that love seat, and I covered my head up. And the only lights that were on in my house was the TV. And I thought, oh my God, I hope it don't come up here. The howling that we heard at the lake howled again. And it sounded like it was right at my door. And I thought, oh my God, please don't let me there, please don't let me there. And my little dog was whining and trying to get behind me, in between me and the lift seat. So whatever this thing was, my dog knew that it was trouble. And like I say, all I could do is swish, don't go here, don't go there. Needless to say, it did not come to my house. The house that we lived in was elevated pretty high. It was built to where a car could fit in the garage underneath the house. And it had like 14, 15 steps, like concrete steps, that it would come up, and right there was the door. Well, it had a wraparound porch. And so the porch was pretty high off the ground. I peeked out again, and this thing was gone. I went and I ran and I turned the TV off, and I started peeking out the windows. I could not see it anywhere. So I thought, oh, thank you, God. And that's all that I saw of that one.
Thank goodness. Did this second dog man look like it might have been the same one you saw while camping?
Actually, from what I saw at the time, it could have been. But like we were talking about, it could have also been maybe another one that, I don't want to say followed, because I don't think they could follow somebody from one place to another, but I think that they might be able to sense things that we can't. Just have extra senses that we don't have that could lead them somewhere where they wanted to be. But like I said, I didn't get enough look at it. It was underneath the street light next door in their backyard. And I just know what I saw, what it looked like from my window. I couldn't tell you really what the front of him looked like up close, because this one that looked over in my tent was only maybe 3 foot from me. And whenever I opened my eyes, I closed them real quick. As far as the walking away backwards, if I could have seen the back of him, I could have probably told you yes or no if it was the thing that was at the tent. But I did not see the back of him. All I saw was the front of him at that time in the backyard.
Under those conditions, I could understand why it'd be so hard to tell if it was the same one or not. What's the story behind these strange sounds you've been hearing around your house, Allie?
Oh, we had moved to this house that I was talking about, this elevated. And you could hear these things. We had a walnut tree in the backyard, so we just played it off as the walnut tree. Because you could hear these things banging on the wall in the back part of the house. And the front part of the house was windows that went from the top of the ceiling to the floor. Huge windows. And at that time, I did not have curtains on the windows or any kind of window cover. But I'm sure that if this thing would have, whatever it was, if it was throwing walnuts or if it was knocking itself or whatever, would have come around to those windows. The windows would have been broke if he'd started knocking on them or throwing something at them or whatever. We would be able to see him, he'd be able to see us, and that would have been it, I believe. But you could hear things walking around the lower part of the house. He did not ever come up the stairs. But you could hear, like, twigs. You could hear them snapping. And that fall, you could hear the leaves rustling around when there was no wind. You could hear them rustling around like something was walking in them. And you could tell it wasn't no cat, it wasn't no dog. And I kept thinking, oh my God, it's somebody, you know, they're going to break in here and take everything we got. So I had this little .22 pistol that Ben had given me. And I kept it on me at all times. Well, whenever it started banging on the back of the house and throwing whatever it was, we thought that it was actually walnuts falling off the tree and hitting the roof and falling down, you know, or whatever, making a sound like that whenever it hit the roof. I got to thinking, well, no, because that's coming from the back of the house. It's not coming from the top of the house. But I would never say anything to the kids about that. And I immediately started thinking, just think whatever it is, whoever it is not coming around to the front of the house. What are they trying to do back there? Well, after 2 or 3 nights of this, we went outside in the daytime and got to looking, and there was like a little pile of rocks that was sitting there with walnuts also. And we looked, and there was this dead cat in the backyard. So we got rid of the dead cat and everything. And I got thinking, you know, what is this? Because the cat was not tore up by a dog. I don't know what it died from. I really don't know. I just know that whenever it started hitting the house, there was always something big that would hit the house and have like a bigger bang than whatever it was it had actually been throwing before.
When you saw that dog man in your neighbor's backyard that night, were your windows open?
No. Thank God it wasn't, because we had closed them probably about 7 o'clock that night, because it started getting real chilly, because it was in fall time that I saw this. And it was probably maybe, let's see, it was in July, August, September, October, so maybe 3 or 4 months since we had been camping. That's the period it was between the time we were camping and this thing showed up at my neighbor's house.
Yeah, if it had only been 3 to 4 months since that first experience when you were camping, I can understand. Even if the weather was dreamy outside, I could understand why you wouldn't have the windows open. That does make good sense. You mentioned the howl the dog man let out the second time around when it was standing in your neighbor's backyard. Did that cause your neighbors to come outside, take a look around, see what in the world was going on, what had made that sound?
Actually, I saw a couple of lights come on, one in the kitchen and actually one in their bathroom, because that's what was towards my side of the house and theirs. Other than that, I did not see anyone come out or anything. Their curtains were closed, so I couldn't tell you. All I know is I saw the light through the curtains that turned on, one in the kitchen and one in the bathroom.
Yeah, considering what you had been through at that point, I don't blame you for hunkering down and not looking outside all that much, any more than you had to at least.
Yeah, at that point, I didn't want to see nothing. I didn't want to hear nothing. No. Nope. I saw that thing standing there, and I was like, oh, my God, no, not again. What is happening? Why is this thing in city limits? We were located probably about 3 blocks from the main street of town. And I was thinking to myself for many days afterwards, how was it in town without anybody else seeing it? Why was it in town? I had no idea what to think, what to do, what to say, and I sure as heck wasn't calling no police department and finding out if someone else had seen a werewolf or dog man or whatever you want to call it.
Yeah, that's an easy mistake to make. There are plenty of eyewitnesses who have seen these things inside cities like that. They don't only wind up getting seen out in the country. They do come into town sometimes.
Yep, I wish he wouldn't come into town that night.
No, I can understand that. Well, Allie, it's about time to get out of here. Do you have any closing comments you'd like to share?
Yeah, I do. I've been listening to your radio talk show, and I know that there has been people on there that want to go and try to find these things and see what they are, see what they do, maybe even try to shoot them and bring them in. I want to say, do not do it. Do not do it. If you see a dog man once in your life, you never want to see him again. Never. And you wish that you would never have seen it in the first place. There was one show that you had on, extremely upsetting, and it terrified me all the way down to my soul. At that time, the girl was young, maybe 13, 14 years old when this happened, and she had a friend with her. And I thought, oh my God, this thing is chasing them. How can they get away from them? And after I saw this dog man at the lake and saw how it took off, that's all I could think about later on. And now, how could those girls have outrun this thing? It just terrified me. And all I'd say is, do not try to find these things. If they come up to you, I guess do as I did. Don't try to run in front of it and try to shoot it. I do not believe that there's a gun that would take this down. Teenagers, they want to go out and they want to try to find these things and they want to see what they look like and see if, I guess, they can get them or whatever. Don't do it, because if you go out there and you find one of these things and come face to face with it, you're not going home to see your mama. You're not going home to see your daddy. You said you've got siblings, you're not going to have home and see them again. I do not believe if you go out there and you find one of these dog men and it shows up and you're face to face with this thing, I do not believe that you're going to go back home. The men that think that they're going out there and shoot this thing, I don't believe that they'll come back home. I believe that if they feel like they're in danger, there's not one of them that's going to show up. There's going to be 2 or 3 of them that's going to show up, and they're going to ambush you. This is what I feel, and this is what I think. I don't know how it would happen. I don't know if anyone would believe me, but I sincerely believe if they feel threatened, there's going to be more than one. The only other thing I'd say is if these teenagers want to go out and they want to find this thing, kiss your mom and your daddy and your siblings goodbye, because I don't believe that you'll come back. Please do not go try to find this thing. Please do not give in to your desire to find one of these things. Because like I said, once you find one, you don't ever, ever, ever want to find another one.
Those are all really good words, Allie, and I couldn't agree more. Please don't go out trying to shoot one of these things. Well, thanks so much for coming on, Allie. I really do appreciate your time.
Thank you, Vic, and I really appreciate you having me on your show.
I'm so glad you came and did the show with us. Thanks again so much, and have a great night.
Okay, thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye. Hi, everyone. Thanks for listening to another episode of Dogman Encounters Radio. I'm Vic Cundiff, and I'll be your host for the show. Before we bring on tonight's first guest, if you've had a Dogman encounter of your own and would like to speak with me, whether in private or on the show, please go to dogmanencounters.com and submit a report. I'd love to hear from you. Tonight's first guest is Dino. Dino, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. Please give us a brief bio on yourself.
Well, I'm 46 years old. I've been living in Wisconsin since 1990. I'm a hairstylist by trade. I own a hair salon called MirrorMirrorMilwaukee.com. I've done a lot of different jobs in my past. I've worked for the cable company. I've worked as a locksmith. I've done a lot of jobs where I've done a lot of traveling before I got into the industry of cutting hair. And right now I live in Milwaukee area, and I originally was living in Walworth County.
You just told us about your salon, but what you didn't mention is it's a gothic/horror salon. Please tell us about that.
That's right, it is. I've always been fascinated with monsters and horror, and I lived over in London, England, and trained there for being a stylist. And I always liked the gothic looks of things, so I thought I would combine the gothic and the monster theme or horror theme. I thought it was a great idea, and I had never found any salon in the nation that had anything like that. So I decided to put together a salon like that, and I play movies on a projector that's monster related or whatever type you'd like to watch, actually. And it's very entertaining here for the clients.
Did you have your salon decorated that way before you had your encounter?
No, I did not. At the time when I had my encounter, I was actually just getting out of beauty school. It wasn't even a thought at that time.
I see. Growing up in Wisconsin, had you heard about the Beast of Bray Road before you had that encounter?
Yes, I did. In Lake Geneva, there was, I believe, a woman named Linda Godfrey who was writing articles about the Beast of Bray Road.
How close were you living to Bray Road when all that was going on?
I would say anywhere between 10 to 15 miles away.
Ooh, that's pretty close. What did locals think about the Beast of Bray Road back when all this was going on?
To be quite honest, I always thought myself and a lot of my friends that it was just bunk, that it was just someone trying to make money, because they were talking about it as being a werewolf. And at the time, nobody thought werewolves existed or anything along those lines. So we really didn't think much of it because there was a lot of T-shirts that were made at the time and said something along the lines, I spotted the Beast from Bray Road, and it had a werewolf on it. So we kind of thought it was funny.
Living that close to Bray Road, you didn't know of anyone who claimed to have seen the Beast?
No, I never talked to anybody at all. I've never knew anybody that had seen this Beast, apparently.
Well, that's a good thing then. Before you saw the Dogman we're going to talk about, had you seen anything else that could be considered paranormal?
No, I have not.
Well, that's a good thing. Is it true that you didn't realize what you had seen in 93 or 94 until you started listening to my show?
That's correct, Vic. I did not know anything about the Dogman whatsoever. It just so happened I was listening to another podcast on Bigfoot, and I've always been interested in Bigfoot, and there was mention of a Dogman, and a couple of people had talked about it, and I had no idea what it was whatsoever. And I did a search on my iPhone, and I found your podcast, The Dogman. And so I started listening to your podcast about a year ago.
Well, that had to be quite the eye-opener once you realized what you had seen that day.
Well, up until about a month ago, I really didn't put two and two together from my experience. It was kind of like a light bulb that went off in my head.
Oh, I'm sure it was. How skeptical were your father and ex-brother-in-law before that encounter?
To tell you the truth, I don't even think they even talked about it or knew anything about it whatsoever.
Now that you know they're out there, have you heard about any encounters happening in that area before or after that encounter you had?
Nothing before other than just the rumors before my encounter with the Beast of Bray Road. And nothing has ever happened ever since then, at least in the area where I was. And this was 20 some odd years ago.
Ah, I see. Did that encounter take away your ability to enjoy the wilderness?
No, it didn't. I'm a pretty fearless kind of a guy. No, I'd still go in the woods, for sure.
Well, that's good to hear. A lot of people, they shut down and they just can't enjoy the wilderness after they have an encounter with one of these things. What made you decide to come forward and talk about your experience?
It was one of these things where, like I said, a light bulb went off in my head, and I thought, man, I should really share this with Vic in the show so that the listeners can hear it. I just don't want to come off sounding crazy or anything like that. Everything I tell you about the story is not fabricated. I'm going to try to remember it the best I can since it's over 20 years ago. And I think the listeners would be interested.
Well, I'm glad you are coming forward to talk about it. After seeing what you saw that day, do you think dogmen should be eradicated from the face of the earth, or do you think they have a place here?
Eradicated? No. Captured? Yes. I think there is a place for them, and I think we should try to find one and try to capture one alive, or at least shoot one and try to figure out what it is.
I hear so many people talk about capturing one as if it's like going out and capturing a wild Mustang or something. It's going to be so much more difficult to capture one of these things than a lot of people ever realize. It's not even funny.
Yeah, I can understand that. Like I said to people when I talk about it, it was just a fluke. I was at the right time, at the right place to see this. I don't think you can just go out and look for one.
No, it doesn't seem to be quite that easy. All right, Dino, please tell us about your encounter. Give us every last detail that comes to mind.
Okay. Well, it was in Walworth County in 1993 or 94. It was July or August. It was a warm, sunny day, and it was about 1 or 2 o'clock in the afternoon. I was with my father and brother-in-law. We were at an industrial facility out in the middle of nowhere. So picture going down an old country road, and off in the distance you can see this industrial facility with a long driveway sitting in the middle of a soybean field. Surrounding the facility or the plant is a 10-foot chain link fence with barbed wire on top of it. It's not open to the public whatsoever. And my father had fish put into 2 holding ponds back in the 80s. So we would go there on the weekends and fish, and we would catch and release. And the ponds, there was 2 ponds. Each pond was probably about 1.5 acres to 2 acres big. And surrounding the pond is a gravel road. And in between the 2 ponds is a gravel road. And on the outskirts of the surrounding ponds are like a berm with weeds and the chain link fence with the barbed wire. We were fishing there in the afternoon, and like I said, it was a warm, sunny day, nothing unusual. In this facility, there's always machinery going in the background behind us, so you don't really hear a lot of birds or anything in the air, or animals or anything like that, and we were just having a good time like we normally do. And all of a sudden, over to our right, which we were at the corner of the pond, the first pond, there is some weeds and a barbed wire fence and a chain link fence area. And it drops off, and in that area is where an overflow that goes into a creek from the pond to the creek. And we started hearing snarling noises. We looked over, and we were standing there waiting for something to happen, and all of a sudden we saw the weeds, which were probably about 8 feet tall, moving around, and with this noise, this snarling noise coming out of it. And all of a sudden, this animal came out of the weeds, and we were all standing there looking at it. It turned and came towards us on the gravel road, because we were sitting on the edge of the pond, and there's the gravel road, and then the gravel road turns into asphalt, and you can head straight right out of the plant. Well, as soon as it turned, my brother-in-law was standing next to the pond, and next to the pond is a rowboat turned over. He jumped underneath the rowboat, and my father and I were standing there, and it was walking closer and closer to us. And as it got even closer, I did a head dive into my car right through the window. I didn't want to have anything to do with it. My father was frozen, standing there with a fishing rod at hand. It came down, and it paused in front of my father, and we were about 50 to 60 feet away from this thing. And if I'm describing the animal, what I'm looking at is something that's standing on 4 legs, and it's about 3 feet tall from the skull. So it's pretty tall by the head wise. Its hind legs were much shorter than its front legs. So it wasn't a typical dog or a wolf where you could draw a line from its knees to its front knees, if that's what you want to call it. It was on a sharp angle. And it was very dark in color, as in brown, and it had fur that was thick around its neck area and chest, and it was tan as it got further down. It had a tail that was thick and bushy and kind of curled up. Its face looked like, I want to say, between a wolf and a hyena. It had ears that were pointed, and it had little tufts of hair on the points of its ears. This whole time when it's walking down the gravel road, it's snarling. It never once closed its mouth. And it paid really no attention to us when it was walking towards us until it paused and stared at us. When I looked at him very close, 50, 60 feet is really close to this thing. And I'm looking at it through my car window, and it has a mouth that has fangs. The fangs were upper and lower, and they were very, very large fangs. And I would say the reason why I say hyena is because the body of this thing was much taller in the front, but it had a face between a wolf and a hyena. When it paused and looked at us, it had eyes that were yellow, almost looking like if you were looking through a beer glass. My father was frozen solid. He did not want to move whatsoever. He was standing there, and when it paused and turned and looked at us, my father, I could see him looking down and didn't want to stare at him in the eyes because I think he was afraid that it was going to charge us, or at least charge him. When I looked at its legs, the back legs looked muscular, and the front legs were not really legs. And it sounds real crazy, but it looks more like arms. And I never looked at its paws or its feet. I wish I did, but I didn't. And its arms, I want to say arms in the front because that's what it looked like to me. They were real muscular, and it looked like they had bended in a different way than a dog would. And the whole time when it was walking, its head was swaying back and forth with each step. So his head would go from side to side, and it never closed its mouth. It looked like it couldn't actually close its lips because the fangs were so big on it. When it paused and looked at us, we just didn't know what to think at all, and we were just hoping it just moved on. And when it started moving again. It went onto the pavement, and it fouled it all the way down to the edge of the plant. And we watched it. I got out of my car, and we watched it follow the line of the fence, and it just disappeared. We didn't feel very comfortable after that. We still continued to fish. My father and I and my brother-in-law, we were trying to figure out what it is. And we have been fishermen. We've hunted. My grandfather owned a sporting goods store. We watched National Geographic. We've been to the zoo. And all I can say is this thing looked like a crossbred animal between a hyena and a wolf. What kind of wolf? I have no idea. It's just, the reason why I say hyena is because of its stance, but it had no spots on it. And I have to clarify that. There was no spots on this animal like a hyena. I actually went to the library a couple days later and started looking up hyenas, and I could not find any animal that even looked close to this animal. If I would have had a gun, I probably would have shot it because it looked like a killing machine. It looked like it was very, very mean. I kind of had the fear that possibly that this could go on somebody's farm and grab some kid and just rip it apart. I don't think I could have shot it with a .22 at all. I think I could have used I probably would have had to use a deer rifle or some sort. A shotgun wouldn't have done anything to it other than tear it up and probably just make it very mad. When my father and I were discussing it, we kept going back and forth. Was it a hyena? Was it a wolf? What is it, a hyena? Was it a wolf? We just could not figure it out. And when we were looking at it, we couldn't comprehend in our minds what we were looking at. And it was just like, my God, what is this thing? It's large. It's nothing I've ever seen before. It's not a cat. It's not a regular wolf, because I've seen wolves in the wild and I've seen them in the zoo. It's not a mountain lion of any sort. It's not a fox. It's not a coyote. It was just way too massive. Its head sat on its shoulders, so it didn't have a long neck, and I have to get that across too. It sat right on its shoulders, and its chest part was very muscular, and it looks exactly like the image on your page where the dogman, the black dogman, just lay that down on all fours and change the color, but I did not see the arm or the feet at all, or the hands. So it looked very similar, and that's what got me to think, oh my gosh, this is what I saw back in 93 and 94. And I had tried telling people about it, and they were like, oh, it's misidentification. I think you were looking at a wolf. And I'm like, no, it was not a wolf. It was not a wolf. It wasn't a coyote. It was massive. But it was proportionate-wise. It wasn't like some of the stories I've heard before where the head is massive. The head was big. It was bigger than a wolf, but it was not enormous or anything along those lines. It was, like I said, snarling the whole time. The whole time. That's what was just kind of disconcerting. It was snarling. And the reason why I jumped into my car is because I thought, oh gosh, I don't really want to get torn up by this thing. This thing, I don't know what it's going to do at all. Luckily, it just kind of paid no attention. It didn't give a care that we were standing there or looking at it or anything along those lines. The one thing I do have to say is that ever since that day, I have always kept a box camera up until the cell phones had cameras in my car, a disposable box camera, because I thought, if I ever see anything like that again, I need to take pictures. And it blows my mind when I hear these people that talk about these stories in this day and age that never get a picture taken by the animal that they see. So we watched it go down. I was still in my car. My father was still standing there, and my brother-in-law was still underneath a rowboat. And we watched it go down the pavement heading towards the front gate. and you could see it to a point until like some of the machinery kind of blocked the way where at least I couldn't see it sitting in my car. And then I got out of my car and I was standing there with my father, and we watched it go all the way to the edge of the gate and follow it around. I think it was trying to look for an area to get back underneath the fence, but it's a 10-foot fence, and it went to the front, and then it kind of disappeared. You couldn't see it because the buildings were in the way. The whole time after that, we were discussing it and kept looking back behind us. We didn't leave right away at all. We continued to fish, but we kept looking behind us to see if there was anything sneaking up on us because we didn't want to have anything to do with it. But we had treated it like this is some kind of bizarre, undescribable, weird animal that we just did not know what it was.
How far down the road were you before anyone said a word?
Gosh, I would say a good 1,000 feet away or more, at least, before I even thought about getting out of my car.
Yeah, I figured it'd be some time before anyone said anything.
Yeah.
How close was that creature to you at its closest point?
At the closest point, I would say 50 to 60 feet.
Something I'm a little confused on is you said that at one point it didn't seem to be all that interested in you, but at another point it was walking towards you. I'm not really sure with you saying that whether it took notice of you and was walking in your direction with the sole purpose of coming towards you, or if it just happened to be moving your direction and you were there in its way.
It was on the side of the pond, so it was coming in the direction of the side of the pond that we were at. It wasn't coming at us. So if you were looking straight ahead, there's a gravel road, and it was coming along the side of the gravel road. So we would have to look to the right to see it. So, and then it paused when it got to the point where it was at the closest to us.
Oh, okay, I see. Did it seem preoccupied with your presence, or did it seem to be pretty indifferent with you being there?
It seemed like it was on a mission. It was on a mission to just keep walking, and it didn't care if we were standing there or not. It didn't care that we were human. It seemed like it had a mission to go somewhere and not stand around and look at us for too long or even care about us.
Thank goodness. Did you smell anything from that creature?
No, I didn't smell a thing at all. I couldn't smell anything at the time. No, I can say no.
Yeah, that's not all that uncommon. Some eyewitnesses report a strong stench. Other eyewitnesses, in fact, most eyewitnesses don't report any smell at all, so that's not all that surprising. Did you go back looking for footprints or other evidence later on?
No, I did not. I just kind of left it as it was, and I didn't even think about looking at footprints whatsoever.
Yeah, I can't say I blame you if you know something that creepy's out and about. I don't blame you at all for not wanting to go back there.
Yeah. I didn't want to go into the high weeds either and find another one in there.
Yeah, that wouldn't be good. When all this was going on, did you notice any unexpected drop in the ambient noise?
No, I did not, because there's always a hum of the machinery behind us. So I didn't hear any birds stop singing or anything like that, because there's always kind of a low hum in the background behind us.
That makes sense. From the way you explained what happened, I get the impression that your father, when he stood his ground there, he was the one who was closest to this dog man.
Correct. Yes, he was.
I can't even imagine what that must have been like for him just to be standing there all alone with nothing but a fishing rod in his hand.
Yeah, he was pretty scared, actually. He didn't know what to think, and he didn't want to make any sudden moves.
Yeah, sounds to me like he handled that situation the best way it could be handled. I'm glad he handled it that way. When you're watching that dog man walking towards you, did it appear to be stalking something that day or just passing through?
It just seemed to me it was passing through, and it really didn't care too much that we were there. it seemed like it was on a mission to go somewhere, and it just seemed like it was just passing through. That's it.
Yeah, it's hard to think for them. When you told your family and friends about your encounter, what kind of responses did you get?
Well, I didn't really tell anybody. I just told my mother recently about it. My parents are divorced, and she was kind of shocked to hear about it. And at the time after it happened, I had told some friends about it, and they just kind of shrugged their shoulders and said it was probably a wolf or something. And I said, no, it wasn't. And I said it was so undescribable that you had to be there to see it. And I wish I could have taken a picture. I really, really wish I could have taken a picture.
Well, you know how it is. Hindsight's 20/20. And as far as your mother goes, at least you had your father there to back you up and stand up and say, you know what, I was there. I saw it too.
That's correct. That's correct. Yep.
Yeah, if you have to experience something like that, it's almost always better to have someone else there with you.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's nice to have two other people that can say, hey, we saw it, not just me. It sounds like I'm making up a story.
Yeah, there's no doubt about that. Had you experienced anything in your life before that encounter that you believe conditioned you to handle that encounter?
You know, I have been bitten by dogs over the years. I've been attacked by a couple of dogs, and I pretty much know when to run. I was viciously attacked when I was in 8th grade by a dog, a Doberman. So I pretty much know when to run and not to stick around to see if something is going to chew me up. But that's the closest I could get to something that would be that vicious.
Yeah, that's pretty close. In a way, do you feel lucky because you saw something so few people will ever see?
Oh, God, yes. Oh, yeah. I really feel extremely lucky that I saw this animal.
For a lot of people, it can be a curse instead of them feeling lucky about it, so I'm glad you look at it that way.
Yeah, I don't believe it as being a curse. Now, if it would have stood up on its hind legs and ran from me or ran at us, that might be a different story.
Yeah, when they stand up onto their back legs, that's when it gets real. Everything changes then.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah, no doubt about that. Besides the obvious fact that you saw a dogman that day, what surprised you most about it?
What surprised me the most was its teeth. I had never seen an animal or creature that had upper and lower teeth so large that it looked like it would shred somebody in half, like you could tear a head off of a deer. That's what was most discerning about seeing that thing.
I could understand why that would concern anyone right there. That's pretty impressive to see teeth that big.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Why don't you think you correlated what you saw that day with the Beast of Bray Road?
It never crossed my mind at all. Never. I was just thinking I'm looking at some kind of unidentified wild animal. If it would have stood up on its hind legs, then it would have been an aha moment, like, oh, this is that Beast of Bray Road, or that werewolf that everyone's been talking about. But I just did not correlate the two at all.
Well, that makes sense. When most people talk about the Beast of Bray Road, they're talking about something that's walking about bipedally instead of quadrupedally the way the dogman you saw was, so that does make sense.
Exactly.
On another note, how did the dogman you saw differ from most dogmen you've heard about when eyewitnesses come on and talk about them on the show?
I would say the head size. Some of the people on the show had talked about they had a massive head. This didn't have a massive head. It had a big head. It was bigger than a wolf's head, much bigger than a wolf's head, but it wasn't massive. Like I said, it's very similar to the picture on your Facebook page or on your website, but it didn't have quite as big of a head as that. That's pretty much what I think, if I had to describe it.
It's funny you mention that because one of the biggest misconceptions out there about dogmen is that they have a particular look. They've got all kinds of different looks. It's so hard to put a finger on what they can look like.
Well, I do have to say this, that the animal that I was looking at was very lean and muscular, and it looked young. It did not look old.
When you say that, is that because of its head shape or something else?
I say that because it's muscular and its coat, if you want to call it hair or fur, just looked really bright and shiny. His eyes, it didn't look old. It didn't look like an older dog. You know, when you can look at a dog and say, well, that's an old dog, or that's an old wolf, or that's an old coyote, you know, it looks old and worn out. It looked young.
That makes sense. Well, Dino, do you have any closing comments you'd like to share?
Just keep your eyes open and always carry a camera with you. And if you do come across something unusual, either stand still or run for the hills.
That sounds like really good advice to me. Well, thanks so much for coming on the show tonight, Dino. I really do appreciate it.
Oh, thank you very much for letting me share my story.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Well, have a great night.
Thanks, you too.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye. For the second segment of tonight's show, I'm going to be speaking with Glenn Little and his daughter, Rachel Little. Glenn and Rachel, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Vic.
Hey, how are you?
Good, thanks for being here. Rachel, please give us a brief bio on yourself.
My name is Rachel Little. I recently moved to Virginia, so that's where I call home. We've lived all over the place. My dad was in the Air Force, so kind of moved around, North Carolina being the most recent of places.
Glenn, how about you?
Grew up in North Carolina. As a boy, these were great times because I would get out of school and grab my rifle or shotgun and jump on my bike, and literally I would ride right down through town if I needed to go to any place I wanted that I wanted to go hunting. All I cared about was getting out of school so I could go hunting, if it was hunting season, of course, and spent a lot of time in the woods, joined the military, spent 22 years there, and now I'm retired in North Carolina.
From talking to you two in the pre-interview, it sounds to me like you lived in some pretty places, but if you had known back there what was roaming the woods, I'm not so sure how pretty those places would have seemed to you.
Yeah, that's probably true.
Unfortunately. Before you two started having encounters, what was your take on the possibility of cryptids like Sasquatch and Dogmen existing?
For me, honestly, it's not something that I want to believe or really believe in general, but I will say there's been odd things that have happened in my life that you can't really explain, or if you try to, you know you're really stretching it. Sometimes something just happens, and for me, I'm just going to believe it happened, know what I saw, and kind of move on and not dwell on it too much, because it is pretty terrifying to think that something like this is out there.
Oh, it can definitely be pretty unnerving. How about you, Glenn?
When the things that actually occurred to me when I was younger, when they happened, I didn't know what it was. It was just something unusual that transpired. And, you know, later in life, you find out that things like the woolly booger or old red eyes or bloody bones and all these little names that they've come up with, that a couple of those I've heard just recently, that those apparently were names for Bigfoot or whatever these people were seeing in the woods in earlier days before the old adage Bigfoot was actually coined for whatever Sasquatch is. I guess that's just another word that's been labeled to him, whatever he's called, or Dogman or whatever.
Yeah, they all do have plenty of names. It's pretty hard to keep up, actually.
Yeah, especially if you're American Indian, I guess. They've got all kinds of names.
There's no doubt about that. Rachel, one Friday evening when you were 16 or 17, you had an interesting experience. Please tell us about it.
This experience happened when I lived in North Carolina, where my dad lives now still. And we live out in the country, what you would even consider the country when you imagine it. I mean, our neighbors, closest neighbors, are either cows or they're the ones that we know pretty well. We know their animals, we know what they have. One night I was driving to my friend's house. It probably was around 3, 4 in the afternoon in the summer, so it was still really bright outside. I could see really well. Driving down the road before they paved it, and I remember seeing what I thought at the time a big black dog run across the road. When I saw it, I even thought, man, that was a really big black dog. I just can't get over how big this dog is. And then I started thinking, our neighbors, they only have beagles. So I kept thinking, who owns this dog? And as soon as I was thinking that, this even, at the time, bigger black dog across the street. And I was like, wow, that was a huge black dog. And I'm still just keep thinking of the dog. And, like, I see where it get crossed, and it probably, this is all happening within 10, 15 seconds of me seeing it when I'm far off. I was probably football field away, and I'm steady driving around 25 miles an hour. I'm seeing it. I'm getting closer, obviously slowing down. Still thinking it's a massive dog. I kind of slow down to where the things went into the woods. And when I stop to see where they went in, where I know they went in, I don't even see anything. There's nothing there. If there's an animal, or especially the dogs out where we live, you'd see it on the side of the road and they'd be looking back at you. Nothing was there. And as soon as I thought that, I was thinking, oh, great. Yeah, I totally would die in a horror movie because I can't believe I just stopped for something like this. And I just put my foot on the gas and kept going. Obviously, I'm looking back and I'm thinking on it when I just saw it. I'm like, whose dogs could those have been? There's just beagles around the area, or, you have labs. But that wasn't a lab. It was huge. And then the second one was even bigger. And looking back, I kept thinking, it's the size of one of those neighborhood trash cans that you'd roll out to the end of your driveway. And kept thinking about it. And I was like, well, come to think of it, it didn't even look like it was running on all fours. It looked like it was really hunched over. And I was wondering, well, what could that have been then? But the first thing I thought of when I saw them were just two big black dogs. Like I said earlier, I'm not a huge believer in these sort of things, so I just said, you know what, that was just a really weird thing. Maybe my eyes are playing tricks on me. I'm not going to think about that because I live here, and I don't want to think that something that huge is living in those woods.
When all this was going on, you were in a car, of course, but I still need to ask, did you hear any strange noises?
Not when I was in the car. The windows were down. It was a clear day, really sunny, bright, no wind. It was a typical hot summer day, but no noises. Even when I pulled up to the woods, there was no movement evident at all. It didn't even look like anything crossed in front of me. So that was what was really unnerving.
When they were crossing that road, did they seem to take notice of your presence?
No, they didn't look at me. They did seem to know I was coming because they walked quickly across the road, but they never acknowledged me.
I realize if you're about 100 yards away from them, you're only going to be able to see all that much detail, but I still wanted to check just to be thorough on that. Have you heard about anyone else in that area seeing these things before?
Not me. My dad might know.
No, the Rocky River monster is the only thing I've heard about in this area, and that's maybe 10 miles away, closer to where we used to live.
Oh, I see. Rachel, how long was it after you had that experience before you told your dad about what you'd seen?
Probably a week.
Wow, a week. Why did you wait so long?
Because I didn't want to believe it was true. It was such a weird thing, and I kept trying to logically go through it. I'm a pretty rational individual, or I like to think I am, and I really like to think through things to make sure I'm not making it up in my head or seeing something that I'm not, and it just didn't make sense. I was like, oh, God, I got to tell him because he's going to want to know. I didn't want him to jump to some weird animal or weird Bigfoot or dog man or anything, but I just couldn't figure out what it was, and I figured if I asked him, maybe he's seen a dog recently or some other animal that's been roaming the woods. I mean, he knows those woods a lot better, you know, just being in that area, hunting it and everything. So I figured I'd ask him then.
The world is a lot more convenient of a place when you don't have to worry about things like dogmen being out there in the dark. I can definitely understand.
Yeah, ignorance is bliss.
It sure is. 2 evenings later, on a Sunday, you had another experience. What happened that night?
I was coming home that weekend, the same weekend that I saw those two other things cross the road. I was coming home. This was probably around 9, 10 at night. It was dark outside, still summer. I'm driving down the road back home, and so you can get a visual of what I'm seeing. On the left now is the wood line that I saw those two black animals cross the road into. And on the right side of my car right now is a cornfield. I'm driving down the road, and at the corner of my eye, my headlights also catch it. I see something running down the road on the side of the bank closest to me. And it's running, and I'm noticing it, and all of a sudden it jumps across the bank and runs behind the cornfield. As I come up to where it ran into the cornfield, I notice that there's a trail behind it. But before all of that, my headlight get its eyes, and I see two eyes staring straight at me above the cornfield, running. It turns its head, and I don't see it anymore. I pull up, and I see the trail behind the cornfield that it ran down. Don't see anything. Again, wondering why I'm slowing down, and then just put my foot on the gas and go home and try to forget.
You already mentioned that you didn't get a good look at this creature, but at any time did you see a muzzle on it?
I didn't see its face at all, besides the fact of when my headlights reflected off the eyes, and the eyes reflected red, which I thought was odd, especially, you know, growing up in the country and knowing what it looks like when a flashlight hits an animal. We usually reflect yellow, so it was just odd in that sense, too. But all I saw was the back and it jumping, rather leaping across the ditch and then running back to the trail behind the corn. And this thing it had hair. I wouldn't say fuzzy, or furry, but it had hair.
At any time did you have a chance to see its legs?
The only time I would have seen its legs was when it leaped, and it did look like a leap. I mean, I obviously knew what it was doing, and it was clearly going from point A to point B as fast and quick as possible, or as, you know, getting out of the way.
If you did get a glimpse at its legs, what kind of structure did its legs have? Hominid or more canine?
I would say more hominid, because it didn't look odd running on two legs.
Well, it could have been a dogman, a type 3, with those hominid-style legs, but if it had hominid legs like that and you didn't see a muzzle, chances are it was actually a Sasquatch, but since you didn't get a very good look at it, we'll never really know.
Yeah, I just remember it leaping. It didn't look uncomfortable running. It was large. It didn't look like it was swinging its arms or anything. It just looks like it just leaped across the ditch.
Because of your dad's encounter that we're going to talk about later on, we know that type 3 dogmen are in that area, or at least were at that time in that area. The dogs that you talked about seeing crossing the road 2 nights prior, did you ever get a good look at their legs to see what they looked like, what kind of structure they had?
They looked like dogs, definitely. And they weren't near as large as what I saw coming home that night. I thought they obviously looked similar, but I know for sure that the ones that were crossing the road looked like dogs. It was the first thing that I thought of, too. I mean, the second one did look more hunched over, and I'm not sure if the front legs touched the ground, but those did look like large black dogs.
If you had the window down on the car, did you have the ability to listen for ambient noise, or did you have the ability to tell if it stopped?
When I was pulling up, I had my radio on, and when I slowed down to see where they entered in, I turned my radio down. So that's when I realized nothing's here. This is weird. If I did notice the lack of noise, that would have been the moment I would have. But I mean, I was so fixated that I just could not see any evidence of anything that I saw.
Oh, I can understand that. Glenn, on 2 different occasions you've been growled at on your property. How did those events play out?
Well, once I was just going for a walk. It's a really nice country area to walk and exercise. So I was simply walking up the road, and this was initially after we had moved in, so the road was dirt at that time. They hadn't paved it. They paved it right after. But something was in the woods. You could hear it, and it growled. The further up the road I went, it continued to growl at me, but I couldn't see anything. And eventually, I didn't make it too far, and I said, I don't have a weapon on me. I don't have anything. I felt so uncomfortable that I literally came back home. And I'm not sure that I went back out walking that day. I can't honestly remember. But you could definitely hear it in the woods, and the growls were really deep, guttural growls. They weren't the piercing kind that I've experienced since then, but they were significant enough to know that that thing, it's, whatever it is, you don't want to mess with it. It was very, very intense, more so than if a dog growled at you. I don't want you to think that that's all I was experiencing, because a dog, especially one, it would never frighten me whatsoever. One other time, I was doing something because I was out in one of the fields. There's probably like a 2.5, 3 acre field. There's a pond and then a field adjacent to that goes up to the property line. I was out there for some reason, and there was something in the woods that literally was going back and forth, and it was growling, because it would growl one place and then it would growl in another. And at that point, I remember that day, I said, I'm fed up with this. I said, something's not going to just growl at me and try to intimidate me, because if it comes out of those woods, if it's doing that, it's too aggressive. I said, I literally said that day, and I was going to do this. I said, I'm going to kill it. And so I got a rifle, and I actually rode the four-wheeler out there. I don't know if I had it before. This stuff just all blurs together, but I know I had the four-wheeler, and I was just sitting there on it. And I remember getting off of it and stabilizing the weapon, and I thought about, I don't do this. I don't do it when I'm hunting. When I shoot at something, I know what I'm shooting at. And I don't shoot at a deer. I shoot at the heart. I shoot at the lungs. Whatever I'm shooting at, I know what I'm shooting at. I don't play those games. But I thought about, this thing had me so rattled, I thought about shooting at the noise. I remember that. And I realized at some point that there was a really good scope on this gun. And so I realized that all of a sudden I couldn't see through the scope at all anymore. It had gotten dark, and I was sitting in a field, and I literally couldn't see 10 yards. I don't know. I mean, I really was intent on shooting this thing, and it got to the point it was dark outside, and I very slowly, I said, oh, my God. I said, I couldn't see this thing if it was standing next to me, and I got on the four-wheeler, and I rode back up to the house and parked it and went inside. But that was a rude awakening for me at that moment. I said, good God. I said, literally, this thing could jump on me, and I'd never see it, whatever it was, until it was on me. So that was pretty stupid of me, but that's how intent I was on taking that thing out that day.
That situation had bad news written all over it. Ooh, I'm so glad that it didn't end badly.
Me too.
If you were to put a finger on how the growls sounded, how would you describe them?
It's nothing that I've ever heard in nature before or from a domestic animal. It's really a deep, penetrating growl, and it's ferocious. It's something telling you that I'm not afraid of you. I mean, that's what you're feeling. Because when I'm walking down the road, I knew this thing. It was almost like it was telling me, this is my area. And I did leave. I came back home now, and I was probably 200 yards away down the road easily. And I came back home. I did not go very far that day. Not knowing what was out there at the time, I probably would have, if I had a pistol, I'd have kept going. But this thing needed to be killed. Whatever it was, when I was out there with the rifle, I would have shot it. If it had shown up, if it had walked out of that wood line. But the irony is, it showed intelligence because it moved back and forth. Just not unnerving. Unnerving is probably the best word. It's almost like it was playing with you, but not. It was serious about what its intentions, but the fact that it moved back and forth, that was unnerving.
Looking the way these things look, that's bad enough, but when you factor in the fact that they're so intelligent on top of all that, it makes it that much more unnerving.
I'd have to agree wholeheartedly.
Oh, yeah. Glenn, one evening while you were driving home, you saw something that blew your mind. Please tell us what happened that night.
Well, I had just turned on to the road that I currently live on, and I saw something sitting on the edge of the field. Actually, it was where the animal that was standing above the corn that Rachel saw, that location, it was right at that point where she says it turned around and looked at her. That's like a little peninsula that comes out of the woods, and then there's fields surrounding that, so it goes back into a little cove there. Well, just around the other side of that peninsula, there was something sitting in the field, and it looked totally out of place. And I had driven by it, and I said, what the heck was that? So I stopped, and I'm backing up the road, and just when I got to the point that I could see this thing, I could just see around the corner, so to speak. It was sitting there underneath an overhanging limb, which when I later went out to investigate, the limb, the top of it was right at my chest, just below my pecs. So that's probably more than 3.5 feet right there. I'm 6'2". And it was beautiful. I remember thinking that someone has a very expensive animal that has gotten loose, and they're going to be really PO'd that it's out there in that dirty field. It was sitting facing my neighbor's house. And then this thing turns around and looks at me, and it had intelligence. I remember they say it was unnerving. The muzzle on this thing, it was dog-like, and it had a muzzle that was relatively slim, but not like a German Shepherd. It was more pointed. It was odd. However, it's difficult. You told me to look at the beast of 7 shoots, and I did, and it really did resemble that muzzle, except in smaller version. In my head, initially, when I was thinking about how can I describe this thing, the original Planet of the Apes with Charlton Heston, the chimpanzees that were his friends or helped him out during the course of the movie, that's what I was thinking, more along those lines. But when you see the beast of 7 shoots, that kind of pulls it better into perspective. It was pointed like a muzzle, but that's it, because it had that face that just didn't, the face I can't explain. It was just different. I really can't explain it. I don't have the words to explain. That thing turned around, and I'm talking about within a split second, it was gone. But from where I had to stop because a car was pulling up behind me, I was on the side of the road, but they pulled right behind me, and they weren't going around. So I'm trying to look at them and look at this thing at the same time. And the moment that it turned and looked at me, it was gone that quick. But I did see the face, and I know it was beautiful black. You could see the wind blowing the hair a little bit, and I can't tell you how long it was, but there was enough there that I did see it blowing. And it had a beautiful red streak or some reddish color tint to it. This thing was just gorgeous. I mean, it really, until it looked at you. Once it looked at you and you saw the face, that face it's an upsetting face, and I don't know any other way to explain it.
When it turned and looked at you, did you ever notice any expression on its face telling you about some kind of emotion it was feeling?
I think it was shocked that I was actually looking at it. I know the wind was blowing that day, so maybe that muffled the car. It was really intent on whatever it was looking at. and it was looking towards my neighbor's house, and she has a pool out there, and at that time, I know she had a lot of kids and stuff over because all her children hadn't moved out and so forth at that time. But I know that is direction. It was real keen on something that was going on in that area. I just assumed it was watching them. But when it saw me, it was like total instinct, boom, I'm gone. And it was the way it was sitting. This thing was like sitting straight up, not leaning forward. It was like sitting straight up and comfortable, totally at ease. I couldn't tell you what kind of, I know it was doggish. I could not tell you if I saw arms or legs or anything else. All I saw, I was just captivated by the darkness, the beautiful hair, the red streak, and the pointed ears. But it must have been a baby, but it was big, because just sitting, you're talking 4 feet high. I actually went out there the other day to just double check everything, and the limb had been cut off. I guess they couldn't get the tractor close enough to the edge of the plant and so forth, so they had cut the limbs back. But I know I went out there the first time, and I saw no prints that I can really think of at this point. I've been down that a million times since then and looked for prints and so forth, because just initially, right off the road, there's a little dip that stays wet, and there's always deer tracks there. So I keep hoping that one day I'll see something else, but at this point, no, I haven't.
You said that it had somewhat of a shocked expression on its face, seeing that you were there looking at it, but...
Yeah, like it'd been caught.
Did it have its mouth open at this time, or was it closed?
No, it was closed. I believe it was closed the entire time, but the hair was not over the mouth feature. I remember the color was more pinkish on the face than it was. The face looked completely different than the rest of the body, where everything else was covered with this dark fur or hair. Like I said, it was blowing, so it was long enough to blow in the wind. The face had very pronounced, I don't want to say, it had a snout. It wasn't monkeyish. Well, maybe a little monkeyish, I guess, because it had a snout, but it looked like a dog. Okay? I don't know if that makes sense or not. It had a snout, but it looked like a dog.
I think I'm following you. When you look at the creature in that photo of the Beast of Seven Shoots, if you look at its muzzle, like we talked about in the pre-interview, it does look to me like it just doesn't fit together. The muzzle doesn't look right on that face. As you're describing what you saw that day, it really does sound like you saw that kind of a Type 3.
But very small compared to what's in that picture, because that guy had to be 100 yards plus away from that thing that was standing down in there, and that thing is huge. So it would complement what Rachel saw that was above the corn. Something that height would be more in line with what she saw, with what is in the picture of the Beast of Seven Shoots, I should say, if they're related in any fashion whatsoever. It was just a very strange face. It was completely dog-like. It had a pointed muzzle. I'm not talking about like coming to a pyramid point, but rounded, so it did round out, but I wouldn't say like a German Shepherd. The Beast of Seven Shoots is a very good picture of the face. Very, very much so.
That had to be pretty disturbing.
Yeah, it just happened so quick, though. You're backing up saying, what is this? Because it looked completely out of place. It was just not something I've ever seen before or since, and it was out of place. It wasn't normal. And that's why I had to back up that day. I said, what the heck was that? But, at the same time, it doesn't scare me from going in the woods. I don't particularly like going. Hunting, for me, is to go in very early so you can sit and listen to the stuff in the woods that's moving around in the dark that you can't see. I don't necessarily like it now, but it's not going to inhibit me from doing that.
Well, I'm so glad to hear you can still go out and enjoy it. It might not be as easy, like you said, as it once was, but I am glad to hear that you can still do that. That's good news. Rachel, you've been growled at too, from what I understand.
I've been growled out a few different times in various places. Majority of them have been in North Carolina. We live near a place called River Road, I'm sure my dad could tell you about the River Road monster, but there's this urban legend that there's something that lives in the woods and it'll chase you down River Road. But there have been instances when we've gone out to River Road in North Carolina and you'll open up the car door in the parking lot, which is right by a bridge and everything, and something will growl at you. What's growling at you at 11 o'clock at night when you're the only people around? What animal, if you've been in the woods, isn't going to be more scared of you and instead is going to come up to you and confront you?
Yeah, I can't imagine what that would be like to be out there on a road like that all by yourself and have something like that growl at you. That's not good. Glenn, you went out to River Road with a friend one night and had an interesting experience that left an impression on you. What happened?
Well, one night, a young man who had actually gone to school with Rachel, I used to take her and her friends out at different intervals, and we would go what we called Bigfoot hunting just to see if we could get something to happen, so to speak. Well, one night I was out with this young man, and it was just he and I, and really enjoyed his company. He was very outdoorsy, still is, does a lot of stuff, duck hunting and that sort of thing in outdoors. And we pulled off at the exact location that I actually had something happen to me one other time. And we got out of the car, and we were being quiet and just listening, and we started hearing footsteps on both sides of the road. And I went over to one side of the road, and I was just flashing pictures, click, 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 to see if I was holding it up because it's really thick through there, and, the best I could do without actually going into the woods. And I turned around, and the young man he actually had a gun in his hand. He was really frantic, and he was pointing back and forth. And I looked over, and I said his name, and I said, look, I'm not going to take that from you. I said, but just take a look at yourself. I said, just calm down. I said, whatever it is, they're in the woods. They're not coming out. At least they haven't. But I said, if they do come out, I said, make sure that you know where you're pointing that thing if you actually shoot it. I was really enjoying the moment. And like I said, I was flashing pictures, hopefully that something would show up in one of those, just anything, until I turned around and saw how unnerved he was freaking out totally. And he did calm down and everything, and we didn't stay very long because these things, whatever they were very close, and they were very loud, and they didn't mind that we heard them walking. You would hear one on one side and then one on the other. They were just all back and forth. It was really interesting. And at that time, I had never seen anything that looked dog-like in the woods. So, we just thought we were having a good time. I would never do the same thing again now that what I know.
Did you have any lawn chairs you could have pulled out and copped a squat?
No, not at the time. It was fun. Back then it was fun.
That had to be quite the experience. Glenn, from what I understand, you have a friend, Nancy, who had an experience that she shared with you. What happened to her?
She lived in Myrtle Beach at the time. She's originally from this area, and she was on her way home. She had come to visit her family. She stopped in to say hello, and I knew she wanted to talk, so we hopped on my bike and went out and grabbed something to eat. And on the way back home, she stopped me at this one location, and she said, "Stop, this is where it happened." And she had told me a story where she had seen something similar to what Rachel had seen. The story where she indicated something jumped up the bank and across the road. Well, Nancy stopped me at this one location. He said, right there is where it was. She said it was squatting down. It looked like it was holding something or eating something. When it saw me, it went up that bank and straight down the wood line. At that time, there was no corn in the field or any kind of crop, and it was the exact same spot that Rachel had her encounter with the really tall thing with the red eyes. I asked her some questions about it. I tried to formulate how you might ask, and she said it looked like it had fur. She wouldn't call it hair. It was very tall and dark in color. Ironically, she had told me she had seen something, but I didn't know from her explanation that it had actually happened in the very same spot that Rachel had.
Just like Rachel wasn't able to see any facial features, she wasn't able to either.
To the best of my recollection, no. She said it looked like it was eating something and holding something. And those are the variables that, really stand out when somebody starts telling you a story. Something squatting on the side of the road, looking as though it's holding something or eating something. I mean, that's just strange. That's not animal behavior. It puts it in a whole new perspective. Immediately, someone gets my attention when they start using specific phrasing, like it stood up and walked off. That's not a normal way to explain an animal that you see on the side of the road. I don't think I've ever seen anything that I'd use that terminology to explain it. It stood up and walked off. That's pretty interesting in itself.
Yeah, I'd say it is. When you hear it described that way, it really does have a way of narrowing it down.
I'd have to agree.
Glenn, you were telling us about the 2 times you've been growled at, but you didn't talk about the incident at High Rock Lake. Please tell us about that.
One night we were really having a good time out there, and the first place that we pulled up to, a smell came up on us. And so I moved all the kids to the other side of this long bridge, and we did our little thing there for a while, and then we moved down the road a couple of miles to a different location that was more open. And I just didn't feel comfortable with the smell coming up on us. And when we pulled up at that location, the smell was there, but immediately dissipated. To me, that was just totally interesting at the time. Skunk smell doesn't just arbitrarily go away so easily. But we walked down to our little location and did our little Bigfoot stuff, screaming and yelling and hooting, just trying to get an answer or get something to throw a rock at us or whatever. And I don't think we were having a lot of luck at that specific location. And everybody had already moved back to the car. And I think I was holding like a 20 million gallon watt light at the time. I was still standing there. Everybody else had moved away. And something really massive growled. And this growl, now, I can't even remember if I even had a gun on me at the time. I usually carried one when I went out there. But whatever this thing was, the way it growled and the way it went through me, I didn't even turn the light on. I simply turned and walked back to the truck where everybody else was, and I'm pretty sure I told them what happened at the time. But what blows me away is the fact that that's so unlike me. I'm the guy who turns the light on and says, wait, we came here for this, let's see what we got. That thing, that growl, totally put me off my game 100%, to the extent that I said, I didn't think, it was instinctive. I simply turned and walked away. That's the only way I can explain it. 100%. It just took me off my game entirely, and without even thinking, it was reaction. 100% turn and walk away.
Yeah, sounds like it left an impression on you, and I can't blame you for getting out of there.
It was penetrating, totally a penetrating growl. We actually had an experience one night on Rocky River Road where something similar happened, where we heard all these noises coming from down the river, and we were literally, not a lot of traffic. We were sitting on a bridge, Rachel and a couple of her friends, and we're listening to all these noises, and something actually came up to a really thick area at the end of the bridge and growled at us from that point. And that's when I started the truck, rolled the windows up, and we drove off. So, it's like Rachel said earlier, what animal would actually come to a human and growl? It's instinctive. These things run away from you. This shows an inquisitive intelligence, almost like, let's go see what this is, and if we don't like it, we're going to tell it to leave. And that's pretty much what they did. They told us to leave.
Yeah, whatever it was, it definitely got its message across.
A couple of times, yeah.
Yeah, I'd say so. Well, it's about time to get out of here. Do you two have any closing comments you'd like to share?
I promise I'm not crazy. That's about it.
That's about the shortest closing comment I've ever had from anyone.
I don't know what these things are. I know what I've seen. I don't understand it, but I know they're real. I know I found footprints 18 inches long and so forth. And I know I found what I always assumed to be bear footprints. I actually found one here where I live, and I found one back in Arkansas. But see, back in Arkansas, when we knew there was bear in the area, they even had a mother who was tagged. And so you automatically just assume that's what it is because these things travel so much. But looking back on it now, the fact that there are claws all those little variables you didn't know about or didn't give a second thought at the time. I have seen a wolf out here when we first moved in, and luckily it just kept going up the road. And this thing was massive. He towered over my Akita at the time, so just beware and be aware of your surroundings, because you never know what's going to walk by. And I guarantee you, Fish and Wildlife, if I told them I saw a gray wolf walk down the road in front of my house, they'd tell me I was crazy. So no one can tell you what you saw except yourself. And as Rachel said, don't try to rationalize it to be anything other than what you saw. Don't let anybody call you a liar.
You couldn't be more right. It is what it is. If you saw it, you know it's real. It doesn't matter what anyone else might say. Well, I'd like to thank both of you so much for coming on tonight and sharing your stories with us.
My pleasure, Vic. Thank you so much for listening.
Thanks for taking the time.
Oh, you know you're welcome. It's been a great time. Well, both of you, thanks again so much for coming on, and have a great night.
You too,
Yeah,
Vic. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.